Apparently, UCLA head coach Mick Cronin found that money he needed this offseason. Consequently, the Bruins are ready to go in year one in the Big Ten.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. It's the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and you're joining me at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making this your first listen or watch. And a reminder, you can get every single episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Want to send a special shout out to all the everydayers joining us, as well as all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Let's get into it. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today we are continuing our team preview series, and we're diving into some UCLA Bruins action. And so there's nobody better to help unpack that than the great host of Locked On UCLA, Mr. Zachary Anderson Yoxheimer. Yox, man, it's going to be good to figure out if Mick Cronin can get this thing back going after last year. So we'll be talking about the transition to the Big Ten, getting a bunch of dudes back, a great portal class, and looking to avenge that sub-500 record last year. In the offseason, we obviously had the sad news of Bill Walton's passing, so we'll look at how that may affect this year. Who's going to start for this team? Because 4 starters back, but I'm not convinced they're all starting again. And ultimately, we'll figure out where this season is going to land. I got a feeling from my conversations with Yox that it might be into April. So Yox, that said, let's dive right into this. A reminder of last season. The Bruins were 16-17, 10-10 in the Pac-12, 5th in the conference standings, beat Oregon State in the Pac-12 tournament, then lost to Oregon just by 2 points, and then no postseason tournament after that. It was a weird season of these streaks. Started off 5-2 with 2 understandable losses in Maui to Marquette and Gonzaga. And then there were these lengthy streaks. They went 1-8 right after that, and then 8-1, and then 1-5 to end the regular season. It was wild. So, Yox, as we get into year 6 of Mick Cronin, which I can't believe we're there, what are you expecting for a rebound?
I think Mick Cronin, you take him out of the NCAA tournament, I think that hurts his ego. That hurts everything that he's about. And we saw what that meant to him after lots of times where during last year, he said, we don't have the NIL funding. Like, he came out and said it. And he went out in the offseason and said, yeah, we're not in the tournament. I'm not going to watch those games unless I'm searching for players. And boy, did he ever.
So, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And it's crazy because not only not making the tournament, I was looking back at his history, Yox. 17 losses is the 3rd most in a single season in his career. He had 19 in each of his first 2 years at Cincinnati. It was just the 3rd losing season of his career, the other 2 being those first 2 years at Cincinnati. And so, I love this, that Mick was all like, look, I need more money. I got to become a fundraiser, maybe sell some Girl Scout cookies. I don't know what it is. But, is it as simple in this NIL era as you right the ship by getting more money?
It might be. I think the thing for Mick Cronin, though, was he came out in like his first official press conference of this new calendar academic year, and they asked him, who's the general manager, right? That's like the big position of almost every team. You have Woj going to St. Bonaventure. No, Mick Cronin's like, you're looking at him. I'm the GM, right? Everything comes through me. It's a little easier in basketball because you only have like 12, I think soon to be 15 scholarships to manage. But boy, did he ever, right? UCLA has a team that's loaded with scholarships and a position that's fully funded by NIL, right? They have more scholarship players than there are allotted. So one guy is coming to the school to play basketball literally on an NIL deal. That's how loaded this team is top to bottom.
And look, there's obviously the good of that, and then the difficulty of how do you manage all those minutes, which I guess after last year's youth and everything that came along with that, Mick would much rather have to deal with that than, oh boy, how do we come together? So, Yox, I think that leads me directly to where I want to head next with this thing, is you look at this, and not only is this team now a year older, but it's got such better continuity. Last year, 22.8% of the minutes returned. That was 291st in the nation. I went ahead and did the math for this year. UCLA returns 60.7% of the minutes played from last year. So, last year it was a lot less certain of what you're going to get. Now Mick Cronin knows what he's got. How big a deal is that for UCLA?
I think continuity is a big thing. However, I'm not sure how much it's going to matter considering you've got 8 newcomers, 2 freshmen, 6 transfer guys. Everybody is going to be scrapping for minutes, from the starters to the 6 men to the 12 men to the blowout minutes. I think they'll be fighting for minutes. Like, that's how competitive this team will be. So as much as continuity is a factor, it might be the leadership that's important, but they still might not be able to get it on the floor.
And I mean, it really is interesting because 3 of the top scorers are back: Dylan Andrews, Sebastian Mack, and Lazar Stefanovic. Obviously, it was not after Lazar. It was a massive drop off to 5th. Burka had 4.5 points a game, and Stefanovic had 11.5. And so you get those guys back. You get 4 of 5 starters back in those 3, plus Mr. Williams. And 4 players that started 30 plus games. But the question is, with these incoming new players that you just mentioned, Yox, and we'll get to who those guys are here in our next segment, do you see it being those 4 starters all continuing to start? Or do you think like they're going to have a heck of a time finding themselves getting out on the court to start the game?
The team's captain is going to be Lazar Stefanovic, and he's not going to start. He's not like your captain is not going to start. The only guy who probably is going to have regular starting minutes that I can tell you right now, I'm 100% confident in, is Dylan Andrews, and he could still lose his starting spot. Like, that's how competitive this team is. But if he's losing his starting spot, then UCLA is probably not playing good. That's the only guy guaranteed minutes right now.
And look, ultimately, that is a good thing. I think sometimes we look at teams where it's like, well, obviously it's this guy starting and this guy starting. There is less of that iron sharpens iron mentality. And then that makes it more difficult to really have that edge that you need coming into it. And a big part of it is not only newcomers, but also new conference who dis, right? So there is the massive storyline of now stepping into the Big Ten, along with obviously USC and Washington and Oregon as well. Yox, as you've started to look at this schedule, and obviously we'll unpack the schedule in a deeper way coming up in a little bit, but just the idea of the travel within conference play, how big a factor do you think that's going to be? And then how big a factor do you expect kind of the jump up into the Big Ten? Because, the Pac-12 has been solid, but not like the thing the last several years. And obviously with the Big Ten, it's going to provide a different level of competition.
I mean, I guess this year they get old age Pac-12 and new age Pac-12, right? They have both Arizona and Gonzaga on the schedule. So I guess it's never too far behind. Let's not forget, non-conference, they go to New York to, face yours truly, the North Carolina Tar Heels, right? They get to go all across the country. And then here's one thing to note about the Big Ten schedule for UCLA. The back half, they go to the states of Illinois and Indiana back-to-back in twice, and then the Big Ten tournaments in Indianapolis. So they basically have to go to Indiana 3 times from mid-February on to March. That's something to look out for tired legs travel, where you generally want to save that for the NCAA tournament, which is a little different. That's a lot of miles. That doesn't include the middle part of the Big Ten or the non-conference schedule.
Man, those weary, and thank goodness for the depth of this roster that we've already been talking about, which can hopefully offset some of that. But man, at some point you're just tired of traveling so much, especially, if these are pro athletes and that's all they're doing, that's one thing. But for these guys, they're having to get to class and figure that out as they get back out to the West Coast. And that could be a real struggle. So I think for all 4 of these West Coast based Big Ten teams, that's going to be a storyline to watch throughout this season. So, Yox, we got several more key storylines to talk about, including trying to figure out how to shoot better, who's going to help that, where UCLA fell in the preseason media poll for the Big Ten, and also we want to talk about Bill Walton and what his passing might mean for this upcoming season. Plus, we're going to give you our predictions for the starting 5 for this squad. It's sure to be wrong, as we've already said, but hey, we're going to do it. All that coming up in just a second. right after I tell you about Roy. All right, folks, it's time for our Roy Player of the Week. This week, we're showing some love to Miami quarterback Cam Ward, who orchestrated that ridiculous comeback out west against Cal over the weekend. Some questionable calls from the refs, but it's a W on the scoreboard and in the record book, so we'll go with it. We're putting $100 on Cam Ward right now through Roy, the ultimate platform where you get to directly support your favorite athletes. Download Roy on iOS or Google Play Store. No middlemen, no collective making the decisions for you. You get to decide who gets the backing, and it's easy as a few clicks. Here's the best part. With Roy, you know exactly where your money's going because Roy gives you the power to decide who gets your support. Time to put your money where your mouth is. Every contribution from fans like us help keep athletes committed to the team. And if they decide to transfer, you get your money back. How's that for some transparency? So what are you waiting for? Download the Roy app today and make your contribution. Again, not only are you supporting the athlete's journey, but you're also helping to keep that team strong for next season. Remember, if they stay, you win. If they leave, no worries, you get your cash back. That wraps up our Roy Player of the Week segment. Don't forget, if you want to support more athletes and be a part of their success stories, Roy is the way to go. Keep those contributions coming, and let's change the game. Isaac Shade, Zachary Anderson, Yoxheimer getting you prepared for the UCLA Bruins upcoming season. And Yox, we've been talking about how to get this thing flipped around from last year. Coach Mick Cronin had not only talked about raising money, but just, trying to figure out how to get this thing back going. One of the issues that I look at from last year was the shooting. 3-point field goal percentage, 33.2%. That was 213th nationally. 2-point field goal percentage, 45.3%. That's 341st nationally. Of the returning players or any of the guys coming in, who is giving you hope of turning that around and just putting the ball in the basket at a better clip?
Mick Cronin's emphasis was to go get guys that fit what his mold, right? That play defense, that can be coachable, that can be coached hard. Because if you can't handle a good yelling from Mick Cronin, you're not going to make it at UCLA or wherever he coaches. And yeah, that was the big thing, right? That 3-point number was much worse considering they got hot at the end of the year. Dylan Andrews and Stefanovic got red hot from 3 at the end of the year. Otherwise, it would have been the worst UCLA single season 3-point shooting percentage. That's how bad they were shooting at threes. And I didn't even realize how bad they were at shooting layups. Now, that's partially because they're big men who are 7 foot, 6'10". They couldn't put the ball in the basket or get on the court. And Bona's only 6'10", more like 6'8", right? He's in the NBA. He's still an unfinished product, but he's very good. That's why he's in the NBA. What Mick Cronin did in the offseason was get guys who could obviously play defense. You can't play defense, don't come here. 2, maybe he took a gamble on a couple guys because he got guys who can score. Sky Clark from Louisville. His biggest game at the end of the year, you could talk about ACC-wise too, right, Isaac? His biggest game at the end of the year was against an NC State team that went to the Final Four. So that's one of those hidden gem moments, like, he put up a big number against a team that got hot, went to the third weekend of the NCAA tournament. So that looks better as, that translates. Dominic Harris, that's a guy who can shoot the ball. Literally is there to be a Dave Singleton 2.0. That's a name, if you kind of remember UCLA from 2 years ago, he shot 45%, close to 50% from 3. That's exactly what Harris is from Gonzaga to LMU. Now back to more of a power conference type team in UCLA, shooting the lights out. Bilodeau's supposed to score down low. William Kyle III, yes, you're going to have to stop me because I'm throwing names at you left and right.
Exactly.
Yeah, William Kyle III, he was on an NCAA tournament team from South Dakota State. His mantra, I believe I saw on social media, destroy the backboard. That means he's a rim rocker, all right? He does not like layups, so don't miss layups, all right? And I'm assuming Dylan Andrews has gotten better. Sebastian Mack has gotten better. And the freshmen, Eric Freeney, Trent Perry, they've been impressive. I've heard it and read about in camp. In the Rico's runs, which is where all the NBA players go play in the summer at UCLA against, just playing just street runs in UCLA's gyms. And they've been impressive. So anybody Mick Cronin brought in had an emphasis of you got to be able to put the ball in the basket. Obviously, you got to play defense. And if not, the next guy is going to be able to do it just as much, if not better, than you can.
And again, as we've said, with the depth that is now in UCLA, there is the capability to do that. Because I think maybe sometimes last year it was like, all right, you're not playing defense. Oh, no. Okay, you keep going and we'll get back. Now the bench is a real motivator this year because there is the depth behind you. And Yax, it seems like the media is buying that. We had the Big Ten media days last week. Coming out of that, the media has voted UCLA preseason third, in fact, getting 2 first place votes as well. And I think the Big Ten feels pretty wide open, right? And so there's a lot of possibility here that if this thing comes together, which is so hard to know in the transfer portal era, that things could be really, really strong. Kobe Johnson got a Big Ten preseason player of the year vote. Tyler Bilodeau got a Big Ten transfer of the year vote. Dylan Andrews, Kobe Johnson, Bilodeau, Sebastian Mack, they all get votes for preseason all Big Ten teams. And so there's a lot of possibility. Blue Ribbon picked UCLA fourth. John Rothstein from CBS picked UCLA third. I keep seeing the Bruins in this upper half of the UCLA, of the Big Ten. And so I like, people are believing in this turnaround. And I think some of that is the roster and some of that is Mick Cronin. It's hard to bet against him in 2 straight years of like, I don't know about that. And so that's encouraging. And I think part of this too, Yax, that I want to ask you about is obviously we had Bill Walton's passing in this offseason. Have you heard anything specific that the program intends to do this year to honor him, or just in general, how do you think his passing impacts this year?
Obviously, he was a big voice in college basketball, right? He was a champion of the Pac-12. He obviously championed UCLA hoops. He was a champion of champions, whether he was playing in the NBA, in college basketball. He was a voice of college basketball. I know there's many different players, different voices, Dick Vitale, but Bill Walton, you're watching a late night West Coast basketball game. You're expecting him to do something kind of funky, super funny, the Conference of Champions. But, I think the big thing is, I'm not sure I've heard anything specific as to what they're going to do. Generally, the simple thing is you put a patch on the jersey, right? Yeah. Obviously, there probably might be a BW or something hung up in Pauley Pavilion. But UCLA will be sure to honor him when that first game comes. Whenever they play, I'll have a chip on the shoulder, right? And if they're not reminded, Mick Cronin will be like, hey, Bill will come talk to practice. He would, he'd go and talk to players at practice or different programs. So I'm not sure if there's anything about that, but it's already a new age of transition, right? You go into the Big Ten. There's so many new things, but they all have to know the legacy. Cronin talks again and again about the 12th banner. Well, Bill Walton helped hang a few of those way back in the day.
Just a couple. Yes. Be great to see. And it's so interesting because both the Pac-12 and the Big Ten have this long championship drought. And how wild would it be if UCLA at some point gets that next championship to break the Big Ten drought instead of the Pac-12 drought? That'd be really funny. Yax, let's get into making some starting lineup predictions. And look, we all know it's not always about the first 5 on the floor. It's more often about who ends the game, but this is fun and it's what we do. So last year, the starting 5 down the stretch, because Coach Cronin used a whole bunch of different starting lineups, but the down the stretch of the season, it was Dylan Andrews, Sebastian Mack, Lazar Stefanovic, Brandon Williams, and obviously Adem Bona, who, as you mentioned, is out the door. But those other 4 guys are back. We've kind of said, I don't know if they're all starting. So if you were making a starting 5 prediction, how many of those 4 guys would you have? And who would your starting lineup be if not 4 of them?
I made a video on the Locked On UCLA channel earlier in the year when I think most of the transfers and commits had come through. I'm not sure if Trent Perry had officially signed yet. Okay. A late Steele McDonald's All-American, right? You mentioned Kobe Johnson. When I was going through a list of transfers and newcomers, he's the highest rated transfer, but I didn't even get to his name, right? He is what Mick Cronin says is the Jalen Clark equivalent. That was the National Defensive Player of the Year, and he calls him Jalen Clark 2.0. Wow. That's what he's been saying in the preseason, how good he is defensively. And at USC, while he didn't always shoot the ball the best, 30% from 3, which is much better than most of the UCLA players last year, including Sebastian Mack, who was under 30% from 3. They can put in 10 in a game and not be asked to do so much offensively. So it's going to be Dylan Andrews, guaranteed to start. Point guard, he solidified his role as a sophomore. I'm expecting him to just blossom while also not having to play 35 minutes a game. I will be a little incredulous if he's playing 35 minutes a game with all the travel and all these guys. The other guy that's going to start the 3, maybe a big 2, big 4, Kobe Johnson's going to take Stefanovic's spot. All right. That is where Johnson, when I think Cronin told this story last week, he said when Johnson committed to UCLA from USC of all places, right? The captain at USC to replace the quote-unquote UCLA captain starting spot, take his minutes, who could have transferred out, texted Mick Cronin and said, that's a good get for us, coach. The guy who's going to take his spot. Tell me that's not a captain speaking there, all right?
Brilliant.
And Johnson can't necessarily be the captain this year, right? It's a one-year stopgap, but it's going to be, I think, a very good cohesive unit at that spot, which means UCLA is going to have to replace that next year in the portal or through the commit or both. So it's Dylan Andrews, Kobe Johnson guaranteed. The 5, it's going to rotate, I think, between a bunch of guys, but when you have a Summit League Defensive Player of the Year who is a Dem Bona in a different body, I think that's William Kyle III. So that's who I think is going to start. That's what Mick Cronin believes is his weakness, is the center spot. The 2 and the 4, Bilodeau is going to start the 4. And at the 2, I think is one of the most competitive spots in the country for playing time in any program. You could go with Trent Perry, a freshman. You can go with Eric Freeney. You can go with last year's almost leading scorer, Sebastian Mack, until a toe injury really knocked him out from consistency. Put up a bunch of points at Arizona in that game when UCLA almost knocked off the Wildcats. I think 20-plus points, hit a bunch of threes when the Bruins almost took down the Cats. I think it's going to end up being Sky Clark to start the season. So that's going to go Andrews at the 1, Clark at the 2, Johnson at the 3, Tyler Bilodeau at the 4 from Oregon State, and William Kyle III at the 5, with many different combinations in between.
You know what's funny, Yox, is with all these combinations, man, I have like on my notes here, I've got all these different combinations I played around with, just trying to figure out like what I liked the most and what I thought Coach Cronin would do. And what's funny is I wound up with 4 of the 5 of the same as you went with. The 3 I feel most firm about are the 1, 2, and 3. The Andrews and Clark backcourt, man, I love that backcourt. But obviously that means Sebastian Mack is on the bench. Whoever of that threesome's coming off the bench, man, you feel great about that. Anyway, I've got Kobe Johnson starting at the 3 as well. That might be the biggest no-brainer for me out of this whole thing. And then Will Kyle, I put him at the 5 as well. And here's where I differed. And this is probably the biggest one I went back and forth on. I actually bumped Lazar Stefanovic to the 4 to play like a small ball 4 lineup and put Bilodeau coming off the bench. I don't know if Coach Cronin would do that, but it just felt like, man, if you could have both those captains, as you were talking about, in there, that might be a healthy lineup. So I had Andrews, Clark, Kobe Johnson, Stefanovic, and Kyle, but then I literally put below it, I could just as easily see it being Bilodeau starting at the 4 instead of Stefanovic. The biggest takeaway from all of that for me, Yox, is that you've got kind of an embarrassment of riches that allow Coach Cronin and the staff to kind of tinker and toy around with things and figure out through non-con play what they want to do so that they can move into Big Ten play with a plan.
Yeah, like there's guys we keep forgetting to mention, like Dominic Harris, who I've already mentioned once. He can shoot the ball. How is a guy who can score 18 points a game and shoot the ball not going to start? I don't know. Eric Daly Jr., the Swiss Army knife from Oklahoma State, he is going to figure to play some minutes. And I'm not sure I've said his name once in the span of this 25, 26 minutes.
Yeah.
He can play small ball 5. He can guard 4 positions. He will get on the court. Stefanovic, he might get minutes. I was looking at this. If someone's going to take the Adem Bona role of last 2 years of being the player with the most foul trouble, right? He was always in foul trouble. That might be Bilodeau. You look at his numbers, you look how many personal fouls, look at those minutes of the guys coming in. He's the guy most likely to get in foul trouble and maybe could be a weak link defensively, not entirely sure. That there's so many different ways, right? And the biggest thing for UCLA, you talk travel. Well, maybe they shouldn't complain about travel. You can have 3 starting 5s and not have a single guy that is the same and still have a unit that could go beat any team in the Big Ten, I think. I don't think I'm being ridiculous on any given night. So if we talk about travel, well, Cronin could be like, these guys are trying to start a new 5. And he won't even have to be angry, right? That could just be, load management could be a real thing for UCLA this year, and they won't be sacrificing any talent.
Yeah. So let's get a road 5 and a home 5 and just roll with it and see what happens, man. I'm all in on that. Yeah. All right, guys, we need to turn our attention to that schedule. What's going to happen? Surely UCLA is not going to have back-to-back losing seasons. We don't expect that in any way. In fact, we think it'll be quite the turnaround, and I know Yox feels that way. How's it going to shape up? We'll get to that in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. How about some Big Ten regular season championship odds? UCLA comes in tied with Ohio State for the fourth best odds at plus 850. Purdue leads the way at plus 360, then Indiana plus 650, Michigan State at plus 700, and just behind UCLA and Ohio State is Michigan at plus 1100. Bruins fans, maybe you want to get in on that while you still got some nice odds right there. Go ahead and jump in on it at FanDuel.com. It's America's #1 sportsbook. We turn our attention now to UCLA's schedule for this upcoming season. A reminder, the Big Ten, similar to the ACC, plays a couple of conference games in the midst of non-con play. But outside of that, we'll have 11 total non-conference games. And Yax, it's a slower start with quite a few bye games, with all due respect to the New Mexico game notwithstanding. But man, 3 of the last 4, let me hit you all with this. Saturday, December 14th versus Arizona on a neutral site at the Footprint Center where the Suns play. And then a little break with Prairie View A&M. But then Saturday, December 21st, as Yax referenced earlier, playing North Carolina in the CBS Sports Classic at Madison Square Garden. And then Saturday, December 28th, versus Gonzaga in the Intuit Dome. That's the Clippers' new arena. So, man, that is 3 straight Saturdays of incredible non-conference blue blood matchups. UCLA, Arizona, UCLA, UNC, and UCLA, Gonzaga. Good grief. That's a lot of numerals and acronyms that I can't get out very well today. So, Yax, here's what I love about the schedule, this non-con, and I want to get your reaction to it, is a nice ease-in, again, aside from the New Mexico game, to start figuring out all these rotations. And then boom, you got 3 massive games coming up on the back end of non-con.
And then the other thing is too, other than the North Carolina game, look how much travel they're doing or not doing in the non-conference, right? They've just signed a lot of agreements next couple years or beyond to play Arizona, Gonzaga for multiple years, get up to Washington State, to get up, to go play Gonzaga in Seattle, to go play Arizona back and forth between the state of Arizona, UCLA, or maybe a Vegas. So you're going to learn a lot. In 2 weeks' time, from UCLA to are they a 6 seed or whatever Joe Lunardi's predicting them to be, or a top 24 team, where I think it's a little ridiculous that they're, with the talent, they're preseason number 24 at this moment. I just don't see it. I do think they could struggle, but they will definitely be battle tested, right? This is a team that could have a lot more losses than a typical team that could go deeper in a tournament-like scenario. And let's not forget, at Oregon as your first Big Ten road game, that's a sneaky game in early December on a Sunday.
Yeah. That is indeed going to be difficult. Yes, those 2 Big Ten games in the midst of non-con play, thankfully, are both out on the West Coast, hosting Washington at home, and then, as Yaksha said, heading to Oregon. So Yak's really excited about that December swing of those 3 games. And then, yeah, we get into this non-con slate, 4 of the first 6 on the road. And then, as you said, all those trips back and forth to the Illinois, Indiana part of the country. Those are coming mid to late February. And then again for the conference tournament there in Indianapolis. So, Yax, once we get through all of that, where do you see UCLA finishing in the Big Ten standings and then the regular season record, 31 total games?
Well, this is where I think UCLA has an advantage in some part and a disadvantage. I believe what the Big Ten did in basketball is they made these little pods, these regional pods. You get 3 opponents where you play home and home. Well, UCLA gets SC, Oregon, and Washington. I think that's simple. That might be the thing going forward. Maybe it won't be. Those are 2 teams with 2 new head coaches, 2 of those teams.
That's right.
And I'd like to believe UCLA is better than Oregon, but Dana Altman always has something to say and generally beats UCLA 2 out of 3 times. So, but I'd like to say comparatively, that's easier than going across the country and playing some of these teams multiple times. That's where UCLA needs to bank their wins. And I think UCLA plays SC on MLK Day, which will be a unique Monday night matchup for a crosstown clash. So the Bruins have to bank a 5-1 record against those West Coast foes if they want to win the Big Ten. Like if they want to win the regular season, get a good seed for the Big Ten tournament. So those are the games you have to win. The tough thing, and where I think they might have a challenge navigating a chance to win the regular season title, Illinois, Indiana, Purdue are the same names that I've seen in the top 3, top 4 with UCLA. Every single one of those games are on the road. That's just how it happens to be. So you get a true Big Ten schedule. You play everybody at least once, but they're not guaranteed to come to your home gym. Well, this year, 3 of the top 4 teams, the top dogs in the fight, UCLA has to go on the road. And that's in the back half of the schedule where they'll know what they're made of at this point, but they might be a little weary. Like, could you imagine, all right, you got to get up for Illinois on a Tuesday in February, and then on a Friday night, Valentine's Day, you're not going to want to see the color red in Indiana in Assembly Hall, right? Like, that's
that's a tough place to play,
one.
man. Yes. Good grief. Assembly Hall is such a difficult place to play, especially on Valentine's Day, as you said. That's going to be insane. You know what? Maybe people will be out on dates and they won't show up, and everything will be
not in Indiana. Not in Indiana.
It's Indiana. Maybe they'll be
take their dates to the game.
That's right. Oh man, that's so true. That's so true. That's so good.
I mean, I didn't even answer your question.
That's good. But that's a great
enough.
breakdown of what they got to contend with, I think. And where do you land on where they finish in the Big Ten?
I'm, as I've told you off the air, we'll probably get to in a moment, I'm cocky enough to say, especially as a Locked On UCLA host, people have their opinions. They'll do much better in the NCAA tournament than they will in the Big Ten regular season. I don't think they're a team that'll finish 6th. Again, I just think their team is so stacked. I have a hard time with bias included seeing where they lose. But I also, when you take the lenses off, let's put them to the side, they could have 7 to 8, 9 losses legitimately in some tough games and still have a good record and be a very good team and go far in the tournament.
Yeah.
Top 4 seems correct to predict in the Big Ten. I want to say they are, I think, with the bias on, with the lenses back on, the most talented team in the Big Ten. Now, there's a lot of research, a lot of things that has to happen, a lot of things that has to happen within that. But when you play the games, UCLA with the road, the environment all factored in, the calls, probably top 4 with, I think, an accumulation of losses and a lot of tough games. And the lack of fans wanting to go watch UCLA football, that won't be the case for this basketball team. Let me tell you.
And that's everything you just factored in is exactly where I've been in processing this, Yax. So I actually am almost identical with you. I have UCLA projected 4th in the Big Ten. But what's interesting, and Andy and I talked about this on our Big Ten preview, it feels like teams probably 2 through 10 or 11 in the Big Ten are so similar that it's just going to be a game or 2 separation, as we had 2 years ago in the Big Ten, that you just got to win a couple key games to get yourself into that upper echelon and get a double bye in the Big Ten tournament. So I have UCLA finishing 4th, a 9-2 non-conference record, and a 13-7 Big Ten record to finish the regular season 22-9, which, as you said, there are going to be some losses. I think the travel is going to play a factor, especially in year 1 as they figure out what that looks like. And then ultimately that gives a 5 seed for me. But I think, as you said, I think UCLA's depth and superior talent is going to come into play in the postseason. And so give me a Sweet 16 run at least. But I think that's where it sits for me, kind of as a floor with, if things go right, who knows where it could lead into the postseason. That said, I know you said you're cocky and feeling good. What is your postseason projection for these Bruins?
I'm thinking UCLA gets to a 3rd weekend, and we should be disappointed if they don't get to an Elite 8. Like, come on. Mick Cronin's had talented teams. And I think I said this on Locked On Hoosiers. Maybe I didn't. I forget. If UCLA's not hurt 2 years ago, is there a UConn mini dynasty? Like, is Dan Hurley like the GOAT of college basketball right now if Adem Bona and Jalen Clark aren't hurt? Like, UCLA took Gonzaga to the brink, very beat up without 2 of their best players. And Drew Timme was a beast in the post. UCLA couldn't do anything about that 2 years ago. I know we're in the past. So that's how good they were. And they've been failing, right? So, your Tar Heels a few years before that, a surprising run to the Final Four, which is Mick Cronin's, Final Four appearance. Could have battled for a national championship with that scrappy bunch of players. But this is a team, I think, on paper, you try to game plan, UCLA can go small with those small mid-major programs in a first-round game, right? If they're stuck in a 5-12 matchup, I don't think UCLA is in danger of losing that, right? You get that scrappy upstart, Harvard if they're a 12 seed or something like that. Well, UCLA can go small and shoot the 3. Or if they want to go big, they're limited on size in the post, but they still got a Diamara, who we haven't mentioned. He's 7'3", waiting to get better. Right? He's playing with the younger Spanish national team. So they got some size stockpiled in the back. Purdue doesn't got Zach Edey this year. I mean, they got the point guard predicted to be the preseason player of the year, which is unique. You go from 7'3" to the size difference there. But This is a team that's so deep, Cronin, that emphasizes defense, and that translates to March. And we saw UCLA literally run with that, with just 2 scores to a Final Four, and probably should have made the national championship game, right, with how close that Gonzaga game was in the state of Indiana. So I think they're going to be Mick Cronin's going to be hating the state of Indiana by the time this is all done. But, this is a team that's talented enough and will be tested for sure. Of course, is there a Big Ten curse? Because the amount of teams that get in the tournament isn't the same amount of teams that go deep in the tournament.
We will find that out for sure. But for UCLA, man, it's just getting into this Big Ten, getting last year turned around and doing big things. We expect, I do, it sounds like Yax does even more so than me, a big turnaround from these Bruins. We'll keep our eyes on that and how this talent plays out, who's getting minutes, and perhaps most importantly, who's getting those closing minutes for Coach Mick Cronin. Folks, make sure if you haven't checked out Locked On UCLA, which Yax does a phenomenal job of hosting, that you dive into that. Get out. Listen to it on some West Coast time. Make sure you're getting yourself prepared for some late nights. But Yacht's not as many late nights for people now, as the Bruins will be headed east more often for Big Ten action. If you haven't subscribed to our show on video and audio, make sure you do that as well. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord, we'd love to have you there. It's free to join, and the link is in the show notes. As always, I want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.